Good afternoon, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane and Hurricane HD video blog for the 12th of October 2012. Looking at climatology, we have passed the first peak of the hurricane season here in September. Now we're headed for a secondary peak here near the middle part of October, and the forecast period that we're looking at here the next 2 weeks, and this too is part of Dr. Phil Klotzbach, the hurricane seasonal forecaster expert extraordinaire out of Colorado State University. This graphic actually coming from his 2-week forecast, where he overlays the red lines talking about climatology, and he mentions that this time period, and this is why I'm bringing it up, this time period in here is traditionally the most active for the Western Caribbean tropical cyclone activity over the last 100 years or so, and embedded in there is this secondary peak you can see right there, and we are coming up on that here within the next 2 weeks. And you can see, yeah, things are definitely active out there right now. We have Patty, which is getting sheared apart, but I don't think this is going to completely go away, and I'll show you why in a moment. And then we also have slowly organizing and trying to develop what would be our next tropical depression and then eventually tropical storm, Raphael, trying to wrap up in here as it's bringing squally weather and general unpleasant weather conditions to portions of the Windward and Leeward Islands. Looking at the upper level winds, definitely we have strong southwest flow impacting Patty out here just east of the Bahamas. That will separate the mid and upper level energy and leave the low level swirl behind to move in the low level flow to a position in the northwest Caribbean over the next 5 days. Then we have anticyclonic flow trying to develop, an anticyclone aloft with divergent air. It's trying to spread out evenly over the region, and you can contrast that to what's going on here with Patty, where the air is being blown off the clouds and such in one direction. So that's your shear, whereas this is a much more favorable pattern for the clouds to go up and fan out and not be strung out in one direction. Looking at the vorticity, been tracking this all week long. Notice the rounded nature, getting more round here with 98L, soon to be depression number 17, I think, and so does the Hurricane Center. And then you see what's going on here with Patty. Still some vorticity, but it's getting elongated and stretched out. Another sign that it is in a weakening phase, doomed by those strong upper level winds. The heat content in and around the region quite warm. Up here where Patty is, very, very warm where the low-level center is headed. Again, I'll address that in a moment. And then the path, probable path of TD17 / Raphael to be also cutting across very warm sea surface temperatures, not only at the surface, but this map shows that those sea surface temperatures, the warm water there extends down 50, 100, 200 feet or more. And so these systems can tap that energy and not just scrape off, if you will, the warm water at the ocean's surface. Looking at the GFS, the 12Z run, here is Patty. Watch what happens with this low-level circulation right here. It's going to try to back southwest with this surface flow coming around a very strong Canadian high-pressure area coming out of, you guessed it, Canada. Very strong, 1031 millibars at the surface, and that will push the low-level circulation, the skeletal remains, if you will, of Patty here, down to the southwest to a position in the Caribbean. Meanwhile, we do have what would be TD number 17, I guess it is, and then eventually Raphael coming into the picture in the southeast Caribbean. So we go out to 24 hours from this morning, so this is valid Saturday morning. Here's the weakening surface low with Patty. Here's the strengthening low and probable tropical storm, I would think, if certainly a tropical depression at this point. Raphael will be the next name coming into the northeast corner of the Caribbean here, bringing tropical storm conditions to some of the islands. Just a nasty weekend coming up. For some reason, I left out my 48-hour map, so we'll jump ahead to 72 hours. And you see what happens here. This system goes pretty quickly through the Caribbean, but first bringing pretty intense squalls, gusty winds, etc. to the windwards, the leewards over the latter part of the weekend, and impacting probably the U.S. and British Virgin Islands. I think that Puerto Rico might escape the worst of the weather. And then there's Bermuda. Watch how this system ramps up and starts heading towards Bermuda. Meanwhile, check out what this is. That's Patty sitting there today. It backs off to the southwest, heading for the Northwest Caribbean Sea. If we go out to 96 hours, this would be valid next Tuesday. There is Raphael to be, knocking on the door of Bermuda up here, possibly as a hurricane at this point. And then looky what we have here, the leftovers of Patty sitting just to the west and in the vicinity of the Caymans. So that'll be interesting. That's going to be sitting over very warm water. I would imagine that the air mass down there is going to be pretty dry and stable with this northerly to northeast flow coming down from that big continental high. So this is going to have a tough environment to grow in. If it can stay and not dissipate, then it might do something. If we go to day 5, you notice that what would be Raphael has exited the scene pretty quickly here, heading up towards the Atlantic Canada region, Newfoundland to be specific. But then look what happens. We're starting to get a little bit more in the way of precip and organized convection in the vicinity of what was Patty sitting out here. Now the flow around the Atlantic here has changed, and we're getting more easterly winds coming in, which will provide moisture and some convergence for this system. We'll have to watch and see if this tries to make a comeback in the Caribbean Sea once it gets down there. Interesting times ahead. So folks in the Lesser Antilles, be ready. Well, it's right on your doorstep now, so you know what's coming. And then Bermuda and eventually Newfoundland want to keep an eye on this. And surfers along the southeast U.S. might get some swells coming in from what would be Raphael, so get the surfboards prepared. You might have some good waves to ride as the weekend progresses. Obviously, be very careful out there in any such rough surf conditions. That is it for today. Again, I'm Mark Studdoth, HurricaneTrack.com, my website. Always a pleasure to produce these videos for Hurricane and Hurricane HD, and I'll be here all weekend to do it over the course of Saturday and Sunday, especially as we track what will more likely be tropical storm and then eventually possibly Hurricane Raphael. So have a great rest of your Friday, and I'll talk to you throughout the weekend ahead.